life is always fair. I really enjoy repeating myself over and over again. I just love when the kids talk back to me. I don't care if you get a job this summer. I don't care if you get detention. I can't open this jar. See if Mom can open it. Just take your time in there, okay? No means maybe. Hey, why don't you bring that ball inside and play with it? Hey, don't put that back where you found it. Just leave it on the floor. Ew, bacon. If you put a dent in the car, it's really no big deal. It's 10 a.m. Go back to bed. Look, whatever your friends are doing, just do the exact same thing. I got more than enough sleep last night. If your friends are okay with it, then I'm okay with it. Stop signs are just a suggestion. You don't need a chaperone. You don't need a seatbelt. You don't need a savings account. You should buy the jeans with the holes in them. Hey, we're all gonna go to church, but you can just sleep in, okay? Can we please just hang out in here for another 10 minutes? Hey, can we get some more bickering back there? All right, bills. Yay, traffic. Woohoo, taxes. Yes, laundry. Hey, can you kids come in here and jump on my bed? Quick, go tell Mom what happened right away. You don't need to finish your dinner. Hey, look at your phone when I'm talking to you. I wish I had a smaller TV. We got you that phone for a reason. Texting boys. All right, everyone, listen up. Mom and I are going out of town this weekend, so please, mess up the whole house while we're gone. Please throw a few parties while we're gone. Please forget about the dog entirely while we're gone. Hey, when you're finished pouring that, can you just leave it out on the counter all day? Thanks. Hey, what are you doing?
I'm gonna bungee jump out of this tree.
That's a really good idea.
That was pretty good. I don't think I've said any of those things ever, actually. I do want to take a moment and just thank the fathers and the father figures and those who have been involved in kids' lives. I mean, even statistically, it's shown what a difference it makes in our society when men step up to the plate. So thank you guys. Those who do your job and do it well, we appreciate you. It's not perfect, but we know you do it. So thank you. Now, am I at this stage yet where my son's going to start getting me bad ties and things like that, or what's the plan? What? I don't know what you said, but okay. He has his own money. Has no money. Okay. You know the joke about the old dad that can't hear anything? That's me. Okay. All right, I'll move on. So we've been in this series on the story, and today we pick up at the death of Moses. Moses, if you remember, at the end of his life, toward the end, he gets frustrated, and he doesn't follow God's directions exactly. And he doesn't give God the glory. And when that happens, an unfortunate truth comes to play. He is not allowed to enter into the promised land himself. Instead, we open up with Moses on this mountain, and he's overlooking all the land in front of him, and it's the promised land, just on the other side of the Jordan River there. It's all the things that he's worked his whole life to get his people in there. And he knows he's not going to get in there, but he gets a peek, you know? He gets to look from the mountain and see it all in front of him and imagine the future for his people. But then, while on that mountain, he breathes his last, and he never quite makes it there. It's an unfortunate end, but it's a man who did a tremendous amount of work for the things that God was trying to do. God was attempting to take this nation of people out of slavery in Egypt and take them into the promised land. And we told you last week, because of the wandering, there was a little bit of an aside. There was a whole generation lost in the desert. But now they have come full term, and they're just about to go in. But first, they need a new leader. Now, I want you to imagine what it would be like for you to have to follow in the footsteps of Moses. Now, that's a pretty big name, right? Like, I wouldn't want to follow in the steps of Billy Graham, right? Like that's just not, you don't want to do that. It's kind of hard to follow in the footsteps of someone with such a big footprint. But the next follower, and you may or may not know this because we're kind of now past the part of the story that everyone knows with the parting of the Red Sea and the wandering in the desert and the Ten Commandments. We're now to the new leader, and his name happens to be a guy by the name of Joshua. And if you ever forget, you simply do the books of the Bible, right? You got the first 5, which are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then what's the very next book? Joshua. He's got his own book. See, you can remember that. Joshua is the one who follows in Moses' footsteps. And Joshua's role, unfortunately, is going to be very different than Moses' role. Moses was this kind of benevolent leader who led them out of slavery and promised them great things in the future. But Joshua's got something more that he's got to do. He's got to take them into the promised land. And in that promised land are already people living there. And unfortunately, the book of Joshua is largely a book of warfare. It's a book of going in there and driving out the people and claiming stake to this is what God chose to give to these people, and this is where they need to be. And so in a really intense way, we move from God the provider and God the rule giver to God the warrior. And it's a big transition. And Joshua's role is going to be so different than Moses's was. There are a number of famous stories in the book of Joshua you may not even realize. If you've heard of Rahab the prostitute who hid the spies, that's in Joshua. If you've ever heard the children's song, "And the walls came tumbling down," that was terrible, but you know what I'm talking about? That's in Joshua. If you've heard the story where God made the sun stand still in the sky over Gibeon, that was in Joshua. So there's plenty of stories here you recognize, even if it's not the first book of the Bible you think of. And the last thing that I want to tell you about this is that because Joshua is following in the footsteps of someone so important, and because his task is largely filled with danger and warfare, there is a primary theme in the book of Joshua that is unforgettable if anyone ever points it out to you. The theme is courage, being courageous. Because it is hard to follow in the footsteps of a leader before you, and it is hard to walk into a dangerous place and do the task God gave you. Courage. And so just to demonstrate that, let's just go to Joshua chapter 1. You don't have to get very far in the book to see this, but we are laying the groundwork for it. And right here, God, or the angel from God, is speaking to Joshua. And this is what he says. "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them." Verse 7, "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." Jumping down to verse 9, "Have I not commanded you, be what? Strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Sure seems like there's a theme here that they're trying to get us to come up with, When the Bible is repetitive, it's usually repetitive on purpose. And he says to him over and over again, be strong and courageous. So last week we talked about how we could relate to the idea of wandering sometime in life. Sometimes you don't have a reason or a purpose, or you don't know where you're going. And we talked about how to avoid that and how to fix that. And today, I guess what the theme is, has there ever been a time in your life where you've been afraid? Have you ever had a task in front of you that you weren't sure you could do? Have you ever known for sure that God wanted you to do that, but you still didn't want to yourself? Sometimes fear has this way of taking over us. It's, as the song says, fear is a liar. Fear will convince you you can't do something when you can. It will convince you that you are not able when your God is able. Fear will leave you frozen in stillness instead of acting in courage. Fear can take and suck all the joy out of your life and erase your purpose in moments. Fear is not in line with the Spirit of God if you truly believe He's in charge. And so I want to think about that. I want to meditate on that a little bit. But let's do that as we go through the story of Joshua. So one of the stories I mentioned that is in Joshua is the story of Rahab the prostitute. So we're going to go to Joshua chapter 2 and just begin in verse 2. And I'll give you a little bit of a preamble here. At this point, they are on the edge of the Jordan River, and they are going to spy out the promised land because they know there's going to be a war, and the first thing they need to do is kind of survey and see what's out there. And so they send out 2 spies to go, and the first city that comes up at the place where they're crossing the Jordan River is a city by the name of Jericho. So they send their 2 spies to Jericho, and they check out the city to see what is going on. And they end up at the house of a woman named Rahab, the prostitute. Verse 2. The king of Jericho, now that would be the guy in charge of the city, was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. They're on to them. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab: bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. So in other words, someone saw them go in there, someone figured it out, and now they are in danger. The king is aware. He has sent soldiers to the house to bring them out and question them, if not do a whole lot worse. So they send the soldiers in, and this is where Rahab's part in the story becomes surprisingly important. Going down to verse 4. But the woman had taken the 2 men, and what did she do? She hid them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. And then she goes on and gives this long story about how, you know what, I think they left over that way, and you should probably run and get to them real quick. And she sends them off to try to chase down a rabbit that isn't there. Now, a couple of questions you may be asking yourself. Why in the world are we talking about Rahab, the prostitute? First of all, you've got her history. Second of all, she lied. I hate to acknowledge that, but you know she did lie. But the question is, why is her story so important? And the reason is that it works into a larger story. It works into the story of what God was doing. And she protected these Israelites. And it was sort of a strange thing, and maybe something you didn't expect, but it does play an important role. So, for instance, have you ever asked yourself why she lied? Why did she help those spies? Why would she ever do that? And I think the answer is fairly telling. So jump down to verse 8. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land. Now, when you say the Lord, that's not just a God. That is the Jewish God. That is his proper name. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. That is an artistic way of putting it. Melting in fear. A little bit further, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. We've heard the stories. We understand how powerful your God is. This is what people have told us. And people around here are frightened of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. That's a whole other story we don't have time to tell, but they did conquer a little bit of land on the east side of the Jordan, and 2.5 tribes decided to settle on that side of the river. But that's a whole other story. The point is that we have heard these stories of your God, and his name is becoming known throughout the region. You sometimes forget that there's a bigger story going on here. This is about God revealing himself to the world. This is about God appearing strong and powerful. And what she is talking about resembles something like the Christian idea of faith. She believes God is powerful. She believes that their people have been handed over. She believes that he is the God of the universe. And it's an unbelievable change. Going down to verse 11. When we heard it, our hearts melted in fear, same image, and everyone's courage failed because of you, for the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. That's a big statement from a foreigner and a non-believer. Well, prior to this. She just acknowledged the one true God as the God of the universe. She believes that their people will be given over. And so, one, she's important because she resembles faith. And two, I think she demonstrates a little bit of wisdom. We're down to verse 12. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. She's talking to the spies, asking to cut a deal. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brother and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. In other words, she says, I help you. I know that you are going to win this battle. Please protect my family. She sees, she believes, and then she acts with wisdom to save her family. And there are all sorts of interesting places in the Bible where women pop up and have a major role. And this is such a major role because it allows Israel to get that foot in the door and to ultimately win over the land. It's really interesting. She's acting in faith and she's acting in wisdom. And if you don't know this, Rahab is famous for another reason too. Because if you go to the New Testament, you go to the very first chapter of the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, you get a genealogy of Jesus' ancestors. And for the most part, it follows just the men because that's how genealogies work. But you go down the line and you know there are a few spots where women are mentioned, the mother of so and so. And you know whose name is right there? Rahab the prostitute. Unbelievable. And as much as she may not seem like this figure that you would want to emulate, she saw the big picture of God's story and she played her role in it. And for that reason alone, she gets to be part of the ancestry of Christ. Wild, right? So here we have this, right? She cuts a deal for her family and all goes well. Now, the spies return safely and it looks like everything is in order, but there are a couple things that need to be done first. And all of these are going to be about teaching the Israelites to trust God with the battle that is ahead of them. And it comes in very powerful ways. First of all, there's an incident when they cross over the Jordan River. And just to give you a piece of it, Joshua chapter 3, verse 15. They're going to cross over the Jordan River. Now, that's really important. That is essentially the boundary into Israel proper. Once they cross over the river, they're in sweet Beulah land, or whatever you'd like to call it. They're in the promised land. And so that's the boundary. And they're right on the cusp of history. It says, now the Jordan is at a flood stage all during the harvest. And apparently we're in the harvest time. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away. Now, here's my question. Does this remind you of anything? This is a redoing of the Red Sea miracle when he parted the waters. So when they were leaving Egypt, they parted the waters and the people walked through. And when they are leaving the desert and going into the promised land, essentially the waters of the river are parted and they walk through on dry land. Now, why would God do that? Did he not want their feet to get wet? No, it was a show of his power. It was a show of, trust me, I've got this. You're going to need me through this entire journey, and I'm going to show you up front that you are now the people of Egypt. This new generation is once again my people. Israel, sorry. You are my people, and I am with you just as I was with the previous generation, and together we are going to do this. So number one, he shows them that he is in charge through the crossing of the Jordan on dry land. Number two, circumcision. I'll just read this real quick for you. This is the very beginning. They have not fought any battles yet. This is a very strange plan, I must say. Chapter 5, verse 2, at that time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. Now, it goes on to explain to us why this is necessary, and basically the short version is that all the original Israelites that came out of Egypt had been circumcised, but those born in the desert had not been. And so before they go to battle, they do this. And I just want to mention to this, but if you were about to go into the fight of your life and you were trusting in your own strength, would you then undergo surgery right before you entered into a battle? Not even close, especially this kind of surgery. They were in pain for several days. They could have been wiped out. But instead, they chose to do this as a reminder of their faithfulness to the covenant and their dependence on God. You want to know how to get courage? Trust God with it. And so you have the crossing over the sea on dry land. You have the circumcision, which is not a good military policy ever, and yet that's exactly what they did. And then you go to number 3, the thing that they have to do before they really get into the battles is they have to do the Passover. And with that comes an interesting note. They do the Passover. They recognize it as was given us in the book of Exodus, how to celebrate and remind themselves of what happened in Egypt and how God brought them out. They have a dinner honoring and celebrating that, and then something really interesting happens. Verse 11, the day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land. What's that mean? In the promised land where they now are, they found some fruit, they found some grain, and they ate that instead of what? Manna from heaven. Unleavened bread and roasted grain, verse 12. The manna, the way God had provided for them all through the desert, stopped the day after they ate this food from the land, but there was no longer any manna for the Israelites. But that year, they ate the produce of Canaan. This is a version of mission accomplished, promises fulfilled. We are in the promised land. You no longer need bread from heaven. You're not wandering in the wilderness. You are now in the promised land, and the food is good. And now God will provide for you in the traditional way through the fruits of the land and not through the bread of heaven. It reminds them that this era has changed. The season has flipped over. And still, in a very real way, God is providing for them, but he's doing so by fulfilling his promises. You see, throughout this journey, God has been to them the provider of their food and everything that they need, their water. He's been a lawgiver who has given them the Ten Commandments and all of the laws of the Old Testament, set up the sacrificial system and the tabernacle and all of that. And now God is about to be their warrior. The season is changing and things are altering. Now, so let's get into that part of it. They've been reminded now in 3 different ways that God is in charge and providing for them. So hopefully they'll understand that and they'll enter into this new season trusting God. We'll see how that plays out. But let's now get to the story of the walls tumbling down. So remember I said that Rahab the prostitute that they spied out, what city was that? Jericho. And Jericho is a fortified city, which means it has walls all around it, high, powerful walls that you couldn't get past. This was a very important part of the ancient world. This was how you protected your city and kept enemies from invading, so they have this wall. But that obviously creates an issue for the Israelites, who are themselves at this time the invaders. And so God tells them he has a plan. And he tells them that this is what you're supposed to do, and this will allow you to win this battle over these very high and powerful walls that you don't think you can beat. And I want to ask you what you think about this plan, by the way. The plan is, I want you to get in this grand procession. I want some trumpeters involved. I want people carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which we haven't talked about that very much, but it's kind of the symbol of God's presence. It's what they use as a kind of central focus as they worship. But the Ark of the Covenant, and I want you, all the people lined up in a single file line, just march around the city once. Okay, and then we pull out our weapons, and then we attack the city, right? No, just march. Okay? So they march around once, and then they stop. And they say, then do it again the next day. And once again, they march around, they do absolutely nothing. And they continue to do that for 6 days. Until the seventh day. And the seventh day obviously is significant. We know the story of creation. We know 7 days is always an important number. But on the seventh day, they don't just march once, they march how many times? Anyone remember? 7. What is it about that number? Well, it was kind of a rhetorical question, but yeah, you're right. It's the number of completion. It's important. They're told to march around the city 7 times. And after that, and this is once again such an important battle plan, make a lot of noise. March 7 times and just make a whole bunch of noise, okay? Blow your trumpets and shout. None of this sounds like an actual battle plan, right? Like any general who went to the president and presented this plan, how would that go over in the war room there, I assume, at the White House? Would that go over very well? No, this is a terrible plan. But because this is ultimately about God and God's provision, God wants to remind them one last time that He is the warrior for them, and their courage is based strictly on what He does for them. And so we jump down to Joshua 6 and verse 20. And this is how it says. When the trumpets sounded, this is the big noise at the very end of the 7th day. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed miraculously. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. The very first battle is hardly a battle at all. They knocked the walls down without any ramming instruments. They didn't have any ladders to climb over it. They didn't shoot arrows over the wall, nothing. They walked in because God made it possible. Do you get the idea? The theme of this whole book is that in every part of this, they are to trust God. And God will be their warrior and their fighter for them. Now, the rest of the story, and I know it's a long book, and there's a lot more battles and a lot more warfare, but I want you to know that it's not really quite as one after another after another after another as you think, because things change and alter, and they start taking bigger chunks. And the reason is because, if you know anything about war history, countries tend to make alliances. And when countries make alliances, it brings others in. So here's what happens. There's actually a funny way in which the Israelites accidentally ended up with one particular ally. Honestly, they were deceived. They were tricked. There's a people called the Gibeonites who come to Joshua wearing raggedy clothes, pretending that they also are people wandering in the wilderness just looking for a homeland. And they lie, and eventually Joshua makes a treaty with them as an ally, only to find out that no, they're actually inhabitants in the land, and they just didn't want to get destroyed. So now they have an ally. Well, this creates an uproar amongst the other people in the area who are now suddenly very, very concerned. And so we start seeing alliances of kings and cities get together to try to take on the danger all at once. In fact, we end up with 5 kings on one side and 2 kings on the other, if you will, Israel being one and the Gibeonites being the other. 5 kingdoms and 2 kingdoms. And what that means is you're now getting a lot more people and a lot more land at stake. So instead of fighting one battle at each place, you fight one battle and take all of the places. So the progression of taking the promised land gets faster. So let me read you a little bit of this. We are now down to Joshua chapter 10. It says, "Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces." You see how I confidently pretended I knew how to pronounce all those words? They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. Now, if you know anything about alliances, when one group of people attacks your ally, what do you have to do? Go and defend them. So now they're being drawn into battle. 5 nations on one side and 2 on the other, and they enter into this battle. And what happens is it ends up being a tremendous, overwhelming victory for Israel. But it's not just about that, because in this moment, as all this is happening, they're running out of time. It should be getting dark very soon, and the battle will have to end because, they didn't exactly have flashlights back then. And so, once it gets down to darkness, the battle will have to end, but they need more time to finish the job. They need to take on everyone. They need to win this battle that needs to be done so they can move on and have all of this. And so God does something incredibly miraculous that we've been talking about for millennia. We're now down to 10:12. On that day, the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, and Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel. Now, you want to talk about courage? This takes some courage. "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Aijalon." So the sun stood still and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies, as is written in the book of Jashar. By the way, we don't have a copy of the book of Jashar, we just have it referenced a lot. At that moment, miraculously, it says that the sun stood still and extended the daylight time so that the Israelites could continue battling longer. Jumping down to the next portion. Then the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Wow. But I want you to focus on that last sentence there. Because if there's any lesson in the book of Joshua, this has to be it, right? Surely, who? Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. So was it Joshua's miraculous general abilities as a general that allowed them to win these wars? Was it the great fighting of all these men who were so well trained and so strong? Was it them that allowed them to win the wars? Or was it the miraculous hand of God on their side that said, "Have courage and I will fight for you"? That makes a huge difference. See, the only right basis for courage is that God is helping you out, that you know and understand that God is doing something. Because if you have any other courage beyond knowing that God is with you, then the other word for courage is stupidity. Put yourself at risk for nothing. But when God is with you, courage is the right response. There is nothing to fear. Fear does not win. As he told Joshua, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid," over and over and over again, because of these kind of moments he would know God fought for Israel. And when we act as the people of God, when we do God's plan and God's story, when we are involved in doing what he wants to do in a place, God fights for us as well. And that is the good news. So I don't know what you're going on in life. I don't know what you are afraid of. I don't know where you are. But I want you to know that if you can truly believe that God is in fact doing something in your life, then you can have courage. Because you're not the only one fighting those battles. From here, the dominoes have started to fall. The big chunk of land has now been taken, and more chunks of land will come until eventually, by the end of this, Israel will have taken the promised land completely. Well, mostly completely. We'll come back to some of that. But the end of the book ends a lot like the book of Deuteronomy ends. Remember in Deuteronomy, right before they're about to enter into the promised land, Moses gives up and he's about at the end of his life, and he gives this really big speech reminding them of who they are and to be obedient to God as they move forward. Well, the book of Joshua ends with Joshua giving a big, grand speech. In fact, I think there should be a book of just the big speeches in the Bible. Usually, at the end of their life, and Joshua is, at this point, an old man, and he gets up and he delivers this speech. We'll just jump to chapter 23, verse 14. Joshua, speaking to all the people gathered at this assembly, says, "Now I'm about to go the way of all the earth." What does that mean? I'm almost out of here. "You know with all your heart and soul that not one of the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed." And so he reminds them that they can trust in God because he's done all these things. And in fact, he doesn't just tell them that. He spends the next part of this speech recalling for them the entire story that we've been reading up to this point. He reminds them about how Moses led them out of Egypt because of the plagues, and how God parted the Red Sea, and how God provided them manna from heaven and water from a rock, how he led them by a pillar of fire at night and by a cloud by day, how he led them place to place, and then how he let them cross over the Jordan River on dry land, and how he protected them when they were being circumcised, and how he began to give them the produce of the land, and how he conquered the kings, and how he tore the walls of Jericho down. He reminds them over and over again that all of God's promises have come true. So don't lose your courage now. And be obedient. In fact, he even gives them what I think you could only call a warning. But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you have come to you, so he will bring on you all of the evil things he has threatened. This is part of the covenant, right? If you don't do these things, the Old Testament covenant, then you lose these things. He's giving them a warning to stand up to their role, primarily worship only one true God. Until the Lord your God has destroyed you from his good land he has given you. It all comes with a warning. And then finally, he ends with one big statement that some of you may have on a piece of artwork on your wall somewhere. It's a fairly well-known memory verse. I jumped ahead. I'm sorry. Let me read verse 16, and then I'll go back to where I was going. I always do that. I always forget one thing. Let me go back and finish his warning threat. "If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them," we talked a lot about how God was very big on that, "the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you." Warning to be obedient. Okay, primarily emphasis on worshiping one true God. Now let's jump to the memory verse that sort of ends the speech. We are now down to chapter 24, 14. "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your ancestors, worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Only have one true God." And then verse 15, "But if choosing the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will" what? He reminds them that you may choose whatever you want, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Because look at what he has done and all that he has accomplished, and look at who you are in covenant with. He gives them this final speech. And what's really interesting is this whole speech at the end is extremely ceremonial. There's a lot of details in there, and it's very intentional. It is, for lack of a better word, it is a rededication of the people to God. And in a sense, they all leave that speech saying, no, we will serve God. No, we will do what he says. We'll only have the one true God. We will be obedient to the covenant. All of the people commit to it. It's a collective, united promise. for lack of a better term, they signed the papers on the contract. We will do right. We will honor the covenant. They're now committed to it. But it won't be quite that simple, as I'm sure you know. And this moment of their dedication, they'll be reminded of that, when at times it doesn't quite come out that easy. But this is a key moment. He tells them to choose, and they choose God. And they need to stand by that. So, what are you afraid of? What is it in your life that keeps you down, that keeps you frozen, that keeps you stuck? I pray that you might find the courage to move past that, to find how God wants to use you and where God is going, so that you can join in and be a part of that plan and know that He is with you. As my application point, really the only antidote to fear is courage that comes from knowing God. And so I want to encourage you that if you know God is with you, then go forth and do that thing He's called you to do. If you have prayed about it enough and read enough to know that God is with you and in this act, and if you have discerned in your spirit, then go forth with confidence and believe God. And whatever it is you are afraid of, go to Him, because He is the only one who can do it, not you. Don't try to take on things you can't do, but go to God and ask Him to fight your battles with you. It's the only way to find courage that is worth anything. So I want you to go if you truly know God is with you. And of course, as we've been doing, going through the story, read chapter 8. We're going to get into the book of Judges, and it's going to be a very interesting chapter of the story, I promise. Thank you guys for listening. Hey, courage is a big deal. Fear is a big deal if it gets the best of you. And I think it honestly kind of appropriate on Father's Day to talk about the courage of going forth and leading your family in God. And I pray that men, that you hear that, and I pray the women do as well, because we all need that courage. We need to go out and do what God has called us to do. So if you will, bow your heads. God, I thank you for a chance today to study the story of Joshua. He was in a really difficult spot to have to follow in the footsteps of Moses and to lead people through a challenging, dangerous season. But I know, Lord, that you used him not because he was powerful, but because you were. And I pray that we take that as a lesson of our own, that we learn and understand that in the end, all of our ability comes from you. And so we trust you as the God who is able to do it all, and ask that you lead us out of our fear and into your path. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Let's stand together.